What would you trade to stay alive? Your boots? Your rifle? Your only son's fiddle? Out here on the edge of the known world, coin didn't hold much sway. What mattered was what you could trade: a musket, a blanket, a jar of salt, or sometimes just a promise. Built in 1775, the Wilderness Road cut through the Cumberland Gap like a scar across the land. It carried settlers west. Yes, but more than that, it carried a way of life stitched together by barter. A hand-forged knife might get you enough salt to keep the meat from spoiling. A slab of smoked pork might earn you a night under someone else's roof. Sometimes, a fair deal was the only thing standing between you and a bullet. No one came down that road without needing something, and nobody stayed long if they weren't willing to trade. And no road carried more of those exchanges of goods, grit, and silent agreements than the one Daniel Boone carved through the wilderness. This is strange frontier barter, where they traded what they had, and sometimes what they believed. A man once gave up his fiddle not for food, but for a coat thick enough to keep the mountain wind off his back. Another carved his own coffin months before dying, paid in salted meat and labor owed. Ginseng roots, yanked from Kentucky hillsides, found their way east to traders who sent them clear across the ocean. These weren't transactions. They were survival stories. One settler traded his last powder horn for a single string of red beads, not because he needed beads, but because the man he was dealing with wouldn't take anything else. Trade wasn't measured by weight or coin. It was measured by need, timing, and the strange math of trust. A hand-woven rope could mean safety. A mirror might mean influence. A small favor might save your life or cost it. There are stories of men giving up their boots for whiskey and stumbling barefoot back to camp with frostbitten toes and nothing but a bottle to show for it. Bad trade, maybe. But on the frontier, need made the rules. Not because it was smart, but because the nights were long and cold, and a man sometimes bartered with his hunger instead of his head. No one bartered just once, and no one forgot the trade they couldn't afford to make. And if the man on the other end didn't feel crossed, you might walk away with what you needed and still keep your boots. Not every deal was struck for comfort. Some were made behind closed doors when sickness or fear settled in. Out here on the edge of the frontier, folks bartered for lore, healing, and the supernatural. That is, not all trades were for things you could touch. In the hills and hollers near Wilderness Road, some folks bartered for healing, others for protection, and a few for something they couldn't quite name. They'd come to the door of a granny woman, hands wrung and eyes low. Maybe a child was sick. Maybe the cows were bleeding instead of milking. Maybe a neighbor's ill will had turned into something darker. You didn't pay her in coin. You brought what you had. A jar of honey, a chicken, a verse whispered from memory. Some offered favors instead, the kind that would be called in later, no questions asked. They brewed teas for fever, placed charms above doorways, and used lines from scripture to stop a bleeding wound. Some would break a curse, but only if they figured you didn't have it coming. Some were healers, and others were considered witches. Some whispered over milk buckets gone dry. Others were blamed when hens stopped laying or a man took ill without reason. No one said names out loud. Not here. Not unless they wanted trouble to follow. In cases like that, folks sought out someone else. A counter-witch or witch doctor who could undo what had been done. A prayer. A token burned. And if the signs were right, the balance would return. Then there were the water finders. Those who could bend a willow branch like a compass needle and find a spring beneath packed earth. Some still swear by it. They called it water witching, a gift passed down, or maybe just something the land allowed certain people to know. To outsiders, it all sounded like superstition, but to the people who lived here and traded for these services, it was simply the way things were. The old mountains kept their secrets. The people kept their beliefs. And between healing, cursing, and curing, there was always a trade involved. It wasn't strange to them. It was how folks got by when the doctor was 3 ridges over and trouble was right at the door. Marriages and trade, No preacher, no ring. Just a man laying down his best rifle, a string of red beads, and a promise made in front of her kin. In places where no priest or paper could follow, a marriage could be sealed with goods and a fire-lit agreement between families. Marriage wasn't just between two people. It was between two families, two nations. He gave what he had, horses, cloth, tobacco, and hoped it would be enough. William Bent brought horses to White Thunder, chief of the Cheyenne. A pipe was shared, a bond was made. He didn't just gain a wife, he gained standing, safety, and peace. Marriages forged in barter weren't just between people, they were between bloodlines, between futures. Bent and Owl Woman lived it. Their bond built Fort Bent's legacy, where love and loyalty crossed cultures, and a single trade could shape generations. They married for position, for the right to remain on the land or to pass safely through it. A well-matched marriage could mean access to trade routes, shelter during hard seasons, or help raising crops. But it could also mean survival in a place where names weren't just spoken, they were earned through trust. Marriages like these weren't contracts, they were covenants. And in the eyes of those who lived this life, they were among the most sacred trades ever made. Pelt currency and the price of the wilderness. They didn't mint coins, they scraped hides. Out here, beaver pelts were currency. A clean, soft skin called a plew could buy a rifle, a blanket, or a jug of whiskey. 50 plews buried beneath a cabin floor. That was a man's fortune. Traders didn't haggle over ledgers. They marked the price with stitches, one black line per pelt. It was simple, trusted, the kind of math the frontier respected. Not all pelts were equal. Trappers knew the difference. So did the ones who traded with them. And when a man tried to cheat the count, the seams told the truth. They always did. At the rendezvous, not every deal needed speech. Sometimes a nod was enough. Sometimes just a hand laid open. No one spoke the same language, so they built one patched together with signs, borrowed words, and careful looks. Plains Indian. Sign language moved through the camps like a second tongue. Goods were laid on blankets. Offers placed beside them. Heads nodded. Deals sealed. It wasn't about being quiet. It was about being understood. And out here, that counted more than words. Bartering in fur was rough, but it was steady. Rendezvous camps swelled with wool, powder, needles, and salt, all traded for stacks of plews. Some men came down from the mountains once a year, furs packed tight, hoping to turn a season's hardship into tools, tobacco, or enough supplies to make it back out. It was dirty work, cold work, sometimes bloody, but it paid in the language everyone understood. Trade got men through the season, but it didn't guarantee they'd live to tell about it. The frontier didn't care who you were, only what you carried, and what you were willing to trade to make it to the next sunrise. A musket could buy you safety. A quilt could buy you a place to sleep. And sometimes, what you gave wasn't worth half what it cost to lose. Every deal carried risk. A bad trade could leave you cold, hungry, or dead. But a good one? It might get you through the winter. Might earn you a name. Might save your family. That was the price of survival out here. You traded what mattered. Food, tools, labor, trust, and the ones who made it. The ones who built cabins, raised families, stayed alive. They did it through grit, not luck. What you traded during winter might be the only reason you lived long enough to see spring. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more incredible stories. Until next time, happy hunting.